So Alan Davidson is the Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Communications and Information, and he leads NTIA. He is the President's Principal Advisor on Telecommunications and Information Policy. And as NTIA Administrator, Alan oversees a federal agency with more than 500 employees working to close the digital divide, manage federal spectrum resources, and build a better internet. Alan has spent the last 25 years working at the intersection of internet technology, public policy, and the law. In his roles in government, public interest groups, and companies, Alan has focused on how society makes choices about the technologies we build. On a personal note, I first met Alan back in the mid-90s when he was at the Center for Democracy and Technology, and then we collaborated on a number of initiatives during his spell at Google in the 2000s. He has also held top positions at Mozilla, New America, was a visiting scholar at MIT, and an adjunct professor at Georgetown. Please join me in welcoming Alan Davidson. All right, good to see you. I forgot to mention that Alan is also 120 years old because of the amount of roles that he, sorry?
We started when we were teens, right?
We did start when we were teens. It's true. It's true. Thank you so much for doing this. I know things are a tad busy, but you know, I think it would be helpful, speaking of the old days, to think about going back to the mid-90s. And there was a guy by the name of Larry Irving, who many in this room will know, was in the Clinton administration and at NTIA. I don't think he coined the phrase digital divide, but boy, did he champion it. And I wish Nicole was still here. She unfortunately had to leave. But they're like, they have worked together over a long time on that issue. Just take us back to those days. And have we progressed? Has Larry's notion of bridging the digital divide been realized, or are we still at the same problem?
Well, first of all, let me say thank you for having me, and congratulations to you and to FOSI on really a legacy of incredible contribution in this space. You've been in it for almost all of that time that you're talking about. And if we do think back, it's kind of amazing. It was about 30 years ago, the 30th anniversary. In fact, last week we celebrated the 30th anniversary of the Internet Use Survey, which was the report that NTIA did, the survey that led to coining that term and popularizing that term, digital divide. It's also the 30th anniversary of the Center for Democracy and Technology, my old organization. And so we're hitting these 30 marks. Our SAC is coming up on its 30th. Yeah. And I do think actually it's helpful to think back about what we got right and what we got wrong then. Partly it helps us learn, but it also helps us today think about what might we be getting right and getting wrong now. And I think one of the things that we really got right back then was an understanding that this was going to be really important, that the internet would be something that was really a central focus in people's lives. We were optimistic. I will have to say we were not this wildly optimistic about what a central part the internet plays in the lives of people, and particularly children. I think one thing that we didn't quite get right, well, we didn't foresee social media back then. No. And I think we were probably overly optimistic about how easy it might be for parents and caregivers to have control over what their children see and do online. And that remains a huge challenge today. Yeah. And so I think back, some of the things we got really right, some of them we didn't get quite right, and there's work to do. The digital divide's a good example of that. It still persists today, and there's a tremendous amount of work to do to close it.
Brilliant. Okay, so let's get up to date and let's talk about the BEAD program. And for those of you who are not inside the Beltway, that stands for the Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment Program. What is it? What's it doing? Is it succeeding?
So the backstory here is, you know, we have been talking about the digital divide in this country for almost 30 years. And here we are in 2024, there's still millions of families across America that cannot get access to that basic infrastructure that they need. The good news is that's about to change. The bipartisan infrastructure law here in the US created a set of grant programs, nearly $50 billion that NTIA is administering with a simple but ambitious mission that the president's given us: connect everyone in America with reliable, affordable, high-speed internet service. And we are well on our way. We are making huge progress on these programs. We've given out billions of dollars to tribal communities for middle mile access, for digital equity programs, and our big state grant program, the BEAD program, is about to finish obligating all of its funds to the states who will go out and build the network. So we're making a huge amount of progress on this issue. And I will say, this is kind of a once-in-a-generation thing, right? Generations before us did really big things. They connected everybody with electricity and water in this country. They built the interstate highway system here. This is our generation's big infrastructure moment. This is our chance to connect everybody in America with what they need to thrive in the modern digital economy. So it's very exciting to work on it. We're making a huge amount of progress. We're on track to have everybody connected by the end of the decade. And it raises important questions, like one of the most important things I hear as I go out in the country and talk to people about connecting and getting connected for the first time: how are they going to protect their families online? And these issues are just central in our conversation about connectivity too.
Yeah, it's almost a little mind-warping, because on the one hand, you're rushing to connect, and yet we hear of bans and restrictions on the other side. How do you square that in your head about, how do we do this safely, I guess is the best way of putting it.
I think it's a hard question. You folks are grappling with this, right? And we did something in the Biden administration. We set up a task force, the Kids Online Health and Safety Task Force, which I was the co-chair of. And I co-chaired it with some colleagues at HHS. We pulled together, Health and Human Services, I should say. We pulled together, really, we had an all-star group of folks from across the administration looking at what we could do about kids' online health and safety. And there were three big things we focused on: resources for parents, a research agenda for what we need to do, because there's so much more that we need to do to understand, and a set of best practices for industry, which is something I think we need to really lean into. But one of the big things I think we still need to do here, and one of the recommendations of this task force, is we still need legislation in this space. And the US has fallen a bit behind by not having a strong legislative framework for addressing these issues, either around privacy, which is a huge issue for young people online, children's privacy, and we also have the COSA Kids Online Safety Act. So those are things that we need to do. We have homework to do ourselves to get better at this.
Your task force report, which, by the way, I'd highly recommend to everyone in this room, and I believe Emma Lanzo is with us today as well.
Right here.
Hello, Emma.
Every one of these task force reports has somebody behind it who is actually like the brains and does a lot of the writing. And Emma, with some colleagues from our sister agency, was that person for us.
Highly recommend the reading of it. And one of the recommendations that come out of the report, ironically, was for the United States to join the Global Online Safety Regulators Network as an observer. You just heard from our friends. Do you think that's going to happen?
I hope it will happen. It was definitely a strong recommendation for us to join. I do hope it will happen. I do think this is an area where we definitely can be doing more and leaning in more as a government. We do struggle a bit with the fact that the work is distributed across a broad set of agencies. So, you heard from Secretary Mayorkas, we have these incredible heroes in our law enforcement community at Department of Homeland Security, at the Department of Justice doing the enforcement work. We have people at the Federal Trade Commission thinking about consumer protection, a Surgeon General who's been out really using his bully pulpit as a leader and thinking about what parents and caregivers need to know. And groups like NTIA and our colleagues at who work on mental health and kid safety at HHS, the real researchers on this work. And so together, there's a lot that we can do. I hope we'll join the Observers Network. I know we've done a lot to try to coordinate with others around the world. We just signed a child safety memorandum with the UK and US to partner on some of these issues. So I'm hopeful we'll see more of that, and it'll continue.
What do you make of the phrase regulatory coherence? I mean, is that something,
Yeah.
Does that resonate here in Washington?
I don't know if outside observers would necessarily use that term in reference to Washington, D.C., but the truth is there's a strong desire for it. And I think the idea of regulatory coherence, the idea of actually also looking to industry to step up, the great Julie Inman Grant sitting here talked about the importance of safety by design. I think there is, an emerging consensus around the sets of things that we know we need to do. We need to give caregivers better tools. We have a lot of work to do to research and make sure we understand the environment. And there's a lot that industry can do and could do right now to protect children. The other thing that I would say is we don't need to wait. I think that was one of the key messages of this task force report, was that we've seen enough. There is a lot of research to do. It's amazing to see the mental health community, the pediatricians in the US and around the world come together to think about that research agenda. But we have seen enough and we know enough to know that we need to act. And you're seeing that around the world, and I hope you'll see it more in the US.
Are you willing to take some questions?
Sure thing.
Great. Who would like to ask a question of the head of NTIA? This is your chance and opportunity. It's once in a lifetime.
Well, yeah.
All right, well, while you're forming your questions, I called out some elephants in the room this morning. We have a new government, new administration coming to town. What is your hope, and do you have any fears about the work that you've been working on all this time? And will you still be with us after January 20th? I think I know the answer, but maybe the rest of the audience doesn't.
I'm a political appointee, so the answer to that question I think is well known to people in Washington, that I won't be continuing in the current administration, in the next administration, and that is a feature of our system. But I am hopeful about this work, and the reason is because I know that there are people on both sides of the aisle, as we say, who care deeply about protecting children online. And if you look at some of these legislative initiatives, the child safety protection package that the Senate put together passed overwhelmingly, bipartisan support from both parties stepping up to say this is important. And I actually think that if a similar package or something like it were put forward in the House, if elements of these bills were put forward in the House, they would also move forward overwhelmingly. So I will note that is probably one of the frustrations that people in the US have with our legislative system. It's it's an indication that our legislative system needs to do better for people. We have these bills that have overwhelming bipartisan support on privacy, on kid safety, and they still can't pass through the Congress. The administration has said it's deeply supportive of them. So there is still time, I should say, in this Congress for action. We're hopeful, and I am hopeful and optimistic about the future because this is too important to American families, and it's too important to people on both sides of the aisle in Washington.
All right. I'm going to look out one more time if there's any other questions out there.
And I should say, by the way, also that the vast majority of people in government are not leaving. I mean, people look at folks like me, political appointees, and yes, we have a limited shelf life, but and we've known that all along. But the vast majority of people in government who do this work will continue on. The Emma Lanzos, as you mentioned, of the world will still be here, still doing this work. We have an ambitious agenda that we've set out for next year that we're moving forward with. In fact, tomorrow we are about to publish a request for comment on best practices for ethical research. Like how do we do ethical research in this field, knowing the important issues of privacy and security that come up. So stay tuned for more, but it's just a sign that we're moving forward. Our colleagues at HHS are moving forward their research agenda. Our enforcement colleagues are not letting up, they're taking their foot off the gas at all. And so all of that work will continue even as administrations change.
You know, I don't recall in the report whether you addressed age assurance or age verification methodologies. Are you confident that we're going to finally square this circle after all these years?
We did not answer that question. And I think we had a limited amount of time. We had this triage, and we were given a set of tasks for this report. And it's a difficult question. I do think we're going to be watching keenly the experiences of others around the world. I will say also, one thing that the report did really lean into was the idea that we don't think that keeping young people away from all these services is necessarily the answer. And in fact, we heard pretty loud and clear, your own research speaks to this, I think, the report that you folks have just put out, that parents and young people believe that young people need access to some of these tools. We've heard this loud and clear in our own work, that caregivers want to be able to give a young person a mobile phone. Young people told us these services are an important set of, place for gathering information, for education, for connecting with their friends, essential social connections for young people now happening online. And so we heard loud and clear from young people that they said to us, don't shame us for wanting to be online, for wanting to use these services. Help us thrive when we're using these services. So a clear message that I think you could see in this report is the idea that there was, I think, maybe an old school view, like we just need to keep kids away. We just need to keep young people away. And I think we need to really be assessing that and thinking, how do we make sure they are safe online? How do we make sure they can thrive online? Because they will be online.
Thank you, because now I can credit the person that I quoted earlier this morning, which is we need to protect kids on the internet, not from the internet. So right. Emily Cashman-Kirsten from Google, if you're in the room, there you go. Thank you. Thank you for that quote, which I borrowed and stole directly.
It's terrific. It's a terrific quote, and it reminds me that, the saying that we hear from folks in the civil tech community, build with us, not for us, right? The idea of we're not doing something to them. We need to build with communities, not just for communities.
Right. Let me ask you a question I just asked the last panel, which is, if you had a magic wand in the next 12 months, what would be the key thing that would impact the most in this community?
Well, I'm going to say two things to cheat. I'll say, first, I think that we have an opportunity to do something legislatively, and I hope Congress will lean into that opportunity. We still have a few weeks left. I think you see, even in the news today, again, bipartisan support over the weekend for doing something to protect children online. And so we're cautiously optimistic, and that would make a big difference here in the US to have some of those baseline protections in place. A second thing I'll say is what we called out in our task force report, which is better best practices from industry, right? More and more, we have heard that families and caregivers themselves are overwhelmed. They can't figure this out all themselves. There are a lot of great resources and tools out there, but that's not enough, right? Industry has so much that it can do right now to protect children better online. The defaults that are set, the practices that are built in, they can be better. We've seen some of that work from industry. I think we could see more. And I will say in our US system, the First Amendment plays a big role, makes it harder for government in some cases to do these things, but it does absolutely protect the ability of companies to be able to do this kind of content moderation. And so I would just say that we encourage companies and the platforms, the online services out there to be thinking continuously about how to improve around safety.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, listen, thank you so much for taking the time out, for taking us on this sort of tour of the last 30 years, and I wish you all the best on January 20th next year for your future employment.
We are very optimistic about the future. I do really think that we have this, looking at this room, I will just say, we have come a long way.
Yes.
If you think about these last few decades, we have an incredibly sophisticated community of people thinking about these issues, researching these issues, colleagues around the world, regulators who are working on these issues and coming up with innovative solutions. And I'll just say I salute all of you here today, you, Stephen, and folks at FOSI for what you've done, because it's making a big difference. And I hear it when I'm out working on these broadband issues. This is the top concern that we hear from families, from caregivers. How do we protect our kids online? The work that you all are doing is going to make the world better for these families and for these young people. So thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you for what you're doing. Thank
Please
you
thank
all.
Alan Davidson. Thank you so much.
That's it.
Brilliant.
Thanks.